Okay, welcome to the Muay Thai Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, James Nicol. Today we are back with another episode, and I'm going to talk about exactly how to set up your fight camp diet. So I'm going to dive into the depths of calorie intake, macronutrient intake, food timing, and specific foods as well, specific food choices. So firstly, just to clear up what I mean by fight camp, I mean what to eat in the approximately 6 to 12 weeks prior to fight week. So this is the preparation phase ahead of the weight cut. And I distill these phases into two types of weight loss. So you've got the chronic weight loss, which happens over the fight camp, and then you've got the acute weight loss, the short-term weight loss that happens over the fight week. So for the chronic weight loss over the fight camp, you're going to be aiming to lose fat mass, basically. You want to keep muscle the same. You don't want to lose any muscle, although lots of fighters, the way they do things, will lose muscle. But if you do it the right way, you shouldn't lose much, if any, muscle, and you want that weight loss to be coming primarily from fat mass. So that is what happens in the chronic weight loss. We lose body fat. In the acute weight cut over fight week, we're not focused on muscle and fat. We're focused on short-term weight loss that will all be put back on after the weigh-in. And that comes primarily from total body water, glycogen, which is just how carbohydrates are stored in your muscles and in your liver, and gut contents, basically, just undigested food matter in your digestive system. So what I want you to do right now is to imagine a pyramid of importance. I'm sure you've seen loads of these throughout the years. Essentially, you'll have probably seen a version relatively similar to this. They do differ slightly depending on who creates them, and depending on the goal as well. So for performance versus fat loss versus muscle gain. Here we're talking about performance with the context of fight camp. So imagine this pyramid. The bottom layer is calorie intakes. That is the fundamental, the most important layer, the base of the pyramid. So we've got calories along the bottom. Next, we've got macronutrients. So protein, carbohydrates, and fats in that order. The next layer on top of macronutrients is timing. So how you distribute these calories and macronutrients across the day. And finally, we've got food choices, so the specific foods you choose to make up these calorie and macronutrient targets. So that should be your order of priorities. Number 1 is calories. Number 2, macronutrients. Number 3 is meal timing. And number 4 is the specific food choices. Just a caveat, today I'm going to talk a lot about calories, macronutrients. I'm going to give you specific targets for tracking. So tracking is also known as flexible dieting. I'm going to do that a lot because this is a fight camp diet, not year-round eating. You do have to be a little bit more dialed in, a little bit more accurate during fight camp. You know, I'm not saying anyone, and certainly they shouldn't be tracking year-round. It's quite an effort-intensive thing. But for periods like this where you do need to be a little bit more dialed in, I do like the flexible dieting approach. So alternatives for tracking during a fight camp would essentially be a meal plan. Whenever you've got quite a extreme or specific time-bound goal, you do have to use these higher level strategies rather than things like habit-based guidelines, for example. So an alternative, more specific strategy to tracking would be essentially a meal plan. However, these are highly restrictive and it's hard for a lot of people to stick to them. I do think they have their use though. They can be very useful as an example of a quote-unquote perfect day and to educate athletes on sensible portion sizes for them, education around meal timings, how to distribute them across the day, things like protein distribution as well. And it can also give inspiration for meals as well. So personally with my athletes, I like to use a combination of nutrition targets with some sample menus. This means you get the best of both worlds. So you reduce the amount of decisions. They've got meal options of things they could have and a few perfect days if they want to just, be told what to eat on any given day. But it also allows room for life. So for example, if they can't have a dinner that is on the plan, that's fine as long as they track it and it fits into their total targets. It doesn't matter. It's much less restrictive and rigid this way, and it also helps reduce the stress as well. What if your meal plan says 150 grams of chicken breast and the one you buy from the shop is only 100 grams? This allows room for real life. One thing to really reinforce is that you certainly don't have to track forever. It's a useful tool to allow for flexibility during times where you do have to be a little bit more dialed in, such as during a fight camp. Now, if you're a fighter and you're listening to this and you've never tracked your nutrition, I do suggest trying it for a period of time. There's this common, slightly cringy quote that is, what gets measured gets managed, but it is true. I'd like you to imagine that you're trying to save some money, and it would be a good idea to see how much you're spending overall and specifically what you're spending it on, rather than just saying, okay, I'm trying to save money, let's save some money, without an actual specific plan. You're just leaving it up to chance, basically. You're not being specific and concrete in your actions. In the same way, trying to eat healthier might work, but it also might not. If you're not assessing and tracking things accurately, you might end up just spinning your wheels for a few weeks and not making any progress. While tracking definitely does take some effort, especially the first time doing it, don't worry, it does get smoother and less effortful over time. Nothing sucks more than putting in the effort and not getting the results that reflect that effort you have put in. So the benefit you get in terms of education will be massive from just doing a short period of tracking. It will allow you to eat a little bit more appropriately without tracking as well. So it will benefit you even once you stop the tracking, because you have a decent idea of what realistic portion sizes look like for yourself. One thing to really emphasize is flexibility within this as well. So allow yourself to eat any foods. No foods are off limits. As soon as you ban a food, it becomes 10 times more appealing. So just throw that right out the window. Don't ban any foods, and aim for calorie or macronutrient ranges and weekly averages, rather than saying, I have to hit exactly, 2,000 calories and whatever number of protein, because it doesn't allow room for real life. Give yourself ranges to aim for. Anyway, now all of that is out of the way, let's dive into the topic of setting up your fight camp diet. So let's begin with the fundamental, the bottom of the pyramid, that base layer, which is calories. I will often use the Harris-Benedict equation to calculate calories. Now, the equation is far too long and boring for me to explain to you on a podcast. So because I'm such a great guy, what I've done is I've set it up for you on my website. So if you go to jamesnicholnutrition.com/calculator, it will be linked in my Instagram bio as well. Then you've essentially got a calculator that works out everything for you. So to get your calories, all you need to do is enter your sex, weight in kilograms, height in centimeters, and age, and that will spit out your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. This is essentially the calories that you require to perform your basic functions, things like, keeping your heart beating, keeping your lungs breathing, etc., etc. That's step one. Step two is to set your target rate of weight loss. So if you've listened to my previous episode 6, How to Cut Weight in Fight Week, you will know roughly what weight you need to be at 1 week out from the fight. If you haven't listened to the episode, perhaps pause this episode now or save that episode to listen to next. And in that episode, I cover what weight you should be 1 week out in order to be able to make a safe weight cut. So anyway, once you know that, set your target weight loss needed to be at an appropriate weight by the beginning of fight week. Once you've done that, you will have two options for your daily calories. So you can either have the same number of calories every day. Lots of people like this. It's simple, it's straightforward. Most people train 6 days a week anyway, so changing their calories up massively for just their one rest day is often a lot of effort and not that much reward for it. But if you do want to get a little bit fancy, you can change your calorie intake daily based on your training. So I've created targets for a rest day, a single training, and a double training day as well. Do whatever your preference is. You've got both options. If you've never tracked before, aiming for a single daily calorie target, having the same calories every day, is probably a little bit easier. I've used an activity multiplier to get your rest, single, and double training day calories. Now, you can spend hours trying to work out exactly how many calories you'll burn in this workout, but it's often not that accurate. It doesn't take into account your non-exercise activity expenditure as well. So you might burn, 1,000 calories, for example, doing a really long, really hard workout, but you'll be so knackered for the rest of the day, you might spend the rest of the day on the sofa when you wouldn't have normally done that. So energy balance and energy expenditure is very dynamic. So I'm a fan of just using activity multipliers. It's quick, it's easy, it's relatively accurate, and nothing is going to be 100% accurate. You're always going to have to change your targets eventually. So rather than spending hours trying to work out the exact calories, do this and you can just get started. This is essentially the equivalent of that friend who says that they're going to start training when they get fit. And I'm sure you've told them many times, just get started, you will get fit. It's the same as this. Just choose your calorie target and stick to it, and then you can adjust rather than spending hours trying to get the exact perfect one, because it doesn't exist and you won't find it. And you have to change it anyway. Anyway, that's enough rambling. So we've covered the amount of calories. So if you've entered all that details, you will have your daily calorie target. So the next level of importance are macronutrients. So macronutrients are the primary nutrients that make up your total calorie intake, and they are split into three. So you've got protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So protein and carbohydrates both contain 4 calories per gram. Fat contains 9 calories per gram. Protein is important for your recovery from your training. Obviously, during a fight camp, you're going to be training a lot, so recovery becomes super important. It's important for maintaining your muscle mass. So if you have a high protein diet, you'll make sure that most of the weight you're losing is coming from fat mass as opposed to muscle mass. We don't want to be losing muscle over the course of fight camp. And also satiety as well. Most people are going to have to lose weight over the course of a fight camp, and having a high protein intake will help to minimize your hunger. Carbohydrates are important for a variety of reasons, but primarily for your training performance. So anything above maybe a sort of 6 to 7 out of 10 for intensity is going to be primarily reliant on carbohydrates. And if you are a Muay Thai fighter or an MMA fighter, then most of your training is probably going to be relatively intense. So having an appropriate carbohydrate intake within your calorie target is going to allow you to maximally support your training performance. A lot of people will go too low on the carbohydrates during their fight camp, and while they might make the weight, they will have been performing like absolute rubbish during the fight camp due to the lack of carbohydrates, meaning they struggle to hit those, top 1 to 2 gears. They struggle to really push the envelope in training. If you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds like me, I can train, I feel okay, but I can't really hit that gear 4, that gear 5, it's probably that your total carbohydrate intake isn't enough, or you're not consuming enough carbohydrates pre-training. And finally, fat. So the benefits of these can be summarized under the umbrella of optimal health, but more specifically, things like protecting your immunity, making sure you're not getting ill during fight camp, supporting hormone production, things like testosterone as well, and vitamin absorption. So if you've not already gone to my website, jamesnicholnutrition.com/calculator for the calorie section of this podcast, then do so now. If you're already on this page, what you need to do is enter your daily calories in step 4, and that will break your total calorie target down into an appropriate macro split. So now you've got your total calorie target, you've got your macronutrient targets to make up these calories. So the next level of the pyramid is timing. So first, let's talk about protein timing. So generally, you want to avoid extremes. As with all aspects of the diet, anything that goes too extreme is probably worth avoiding. It's probably a marketing scam or a fad. So with protein, equally, we want to avoid extremes. I recommend 4 to 5 servings of protein daily. It's probably somewhere in the optimal range. Personally, I'm a fan of 4. I generally like to aim for the lower end of what is optimal regarding meal frequency, because this means if you have less meals per day, you have less decisions to make about what you're going to eat, you have less meals to prepare, therefore you've got less chances to mess things up, you've got less chances to, not have something in stock, for example, or not have something prepared. And finally, fewer meals means you can have larger meals within your daily calorie targets. Everybody likes larger portions. Now, spread this protein relatively evenly throughout the day. I recommend consuming a source of protein about every 3 to 4, maybe 3 to 5 hours throughout the day. This will maximally support your recovery from training and making sure that you are retaining your muscle mass and not losing it. Next, we've got carbohydrate timing. So you'll want to prioritize your carbohydrates around your training sessions, especially if these sessions are super intense or if they are longer sessions. The actual amount of carbohydrates is going to depend on your total targets. A good sort of best practice guideline is to have at least a quarter of your plate of carbohydrates before training, maybe a third or even a half if it's hard training, if it's over an hour long. Now, if you are more of a numbers person, well, if it's hard training and if it's over an hour, then ideally you want to be getting about 1 gram per kilogram pre-workout, and the same in your post-workout meal. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you're 60 kilograms, that means you should be aiming for 60 grams of carbohydrates in the, let's say, 4 hours prior to your training, and then again within maybe an hour or so after your training. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, this depends on your total targets, but that is a best practice guideline. Up until now, we've been very numbers heavy, so well done for sticking with me for this long. Now I'm going to get into the practical application side of it. I'll dig into food choices specifically, so that next level of the pyramid, that next level of priority. I'll translate these numbers that I've been talking about up until now into reality. So for proteins, we want to focus on high quality proteins, and we want to be eating primarily animal sources of protein. So this is things like meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And for meat, we generally want to be choosing leaner cuts. They'll be a little bit lower calorie. During a fight camp, most of us will be trying to lose weight, at least some amount. And so choosing leaner cuts will support that goal. Specific foods could be things like chicken or turkey breast or even mince, cod, tuna, salmon, lean beef steak or lean beef mince, generally sort of 5% fat or lower. Lean cuts of pork would be fine also. Things like eggs, low-fat Greek yogurt, and whey protein would also be some good high-quality sources of protein to make up your fight camp diet. For carbohydrates, you want to be focusing on primarily whole grain or minimally processed carbohydrates, so things like brown rice. White rice is fine as well, but things like potatoes, sweet or white, would be great. Oats, beans, lentils, whole grain pasta, whole grain bread would all be suitable fight camp choices. For fats, you want a balance of types of fat, but you want to primarily focus on monounsaturated fats. Suitable fat sources could be things like olive oil, avocado, any and all nuts and seeds, salmon, eggs, and nut butters as well. For fruits and vegetables, this goes without saying, but any and all variety of fruits and vegetables would be recommended to fit within your fight camp diet. Okay, great. So now you know your calorie and macro targets, you know how you should generally split them across the day, and you know some recommended food sources to hit these targets. So let's talk about how to put this into action. I recommend finding somewhere between 5 to 10 easy, simple recipes that you can cook yourself and just rotate between them. Try new ones when you get bored. I do think having some degree of consistency is useful, so perhaps having a similar breakfast every day, maybe even a similar lunch, depending on how much variety you like, and then you can switch things up a little bit more with your dinner. Again, as soon as you get bored, just try some new recipes, as simple as that. If you're wondering which recipes, then eatthismuch.com is quite a useful website. You can plug in your targets and it will spit out a day of eating for you there. It's not going to be perfect from the get-go is one thing I really want to hammer home here. So don't worry about being perfect right from the beginning. It is basically impossible. The best thing is just to get started. You'll learn much faster by doing it and just putting it into action, implementing it right away, and then just making tweaks when you come up against any obstacles or challenges, rather than trying to craft the perfect meal plan, which doesn't exist. And you might spend hours doing this, and then you try it for one day and you realize something doesn't work, so you have to tweak it anyway. So just to recap what I've covered so far regarding setting up your fight camp diet. So we've covered an appropriate calorie intake to support your goals whilst preserving your performance. We've broken this calorie target down into macronutrient targets that are going to support your training performance. They're going to support your overall health. They're going to support your recovery, your maintenance of muscle mass, and your satiety as well. We've then broken down these total daily targets into specific timing across the day. And finally, I've dug into specific food recommendations to include in your fight camp diet. One final thing before I go. If you found this episode useful or interesting, there are 2 ways you can return the favor. Number 1 is to share it, so you could put it on your IG story and tag me in it. Word of mouth is so